Hey, what is up, good people? Welcome to Devs and Dice. My name is Leif, and this is Boxes of Shame, where I each and every week try to paint up a miniature for D&D. This week's miniature was a request from one of my dear subscribers, Kyle Miller. Kyle asked me nicely if I had any Cthulhu-inspired minis in my Boxes of Shame, which of course I had. The spin for me was that I wanted to do this in one evening, 2-3 hours perhaps, a speed paint. Now, the reason for this was really twofold. One, I wanted to see where I was in terms of speed painting. And second of all, I wanted to see how I felt about the result of a speed paint. I'm not sure if it's shown or not, but generally lately I've tried to improve as a miniature painter, and that has really meant that I spend more and more time painting a mini. So I wanted to sort of go back to where I came from, which was speed painting and trying to get something ready for the tabletop as quickly as possible. Now, you knowing me, of course I did my own little take on this miniature, but more on that later. As always, if you like these videos, please feel free to like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel out, and I know, looking at my analytics, about 2/3 of my viewers are not subscribed, so come on people, what are you waiting for? Show us some love, will ya? Anyways, enough about that. Let me show you how I painted up this miniature.
A couple of years ago, I started getting into D&D. As my passion for D&D grew, so did my collection of minis. And like many others out there, I now have Boxes of Shame. Legions of unpainted minis. Now this is my underdog story. This is me painting every single one of my miniatures.
Alright, so this is the Star-Spawn of Cthulhu from Wizkids. Looks alright to me. So looking at this Star-Spawn of Cthulhu, we can clearly see that even the old ones believe in buckling up and safety. Now the interesting thing about this miniature is that it seemed hollow, as you can see here. There are plenty of transparent bits here. Here is where an idea started forming in my head. So I have no masking tape or putty, so I needed to remove the not transparent parts because I knew I wanted to airbrush some sweet ink on that water. So I carefully tore off the wings one by one. Also, there were some mold lines here and there. When I cleaned off the mold lines, I discovered that parts of this miniature were transparent plastic that had been primed, which meant that I would have to re-prime the model. There were also some terrible gaps in the shoulder part of the miniature. These were easily fixed by using some plastic putty from Vallejo. The good thing about this is that it dries quickly and you can actually model and sculpt using sort of a tip of a bottle. Now, giving that some time to dry, we're moving on to the wings to remove some nasty mold lines and cleaning them up. Now, I could not prime using a rattle can, so I had to resort to brush-on primer from Army Painter. I started laying in some of that primer and I chose to thin it out with some water to make it flow better, dry faster, and not obscure any details. Once the body was done, I moved on to the wings, just moving fast and very effective. While they were drying, I decided to start working on the light aspect. Now, I previously had bought some of these LED tea lights that I used for some D&D terrain. I removed as much plastic as possible, starting with the cover, then the plastic covering the electronics. And whammo, there we have it. Just checking here that the light still works, which thankfully it does. Here I'm doing some early tests that look somewhat promising. So over to the spray booth. I will be using Viridis Green and Tenebris Blue intensity inks from Green Stuff World. I mixed up a blend similar to what I did when I painted the Shark way back when, or even the Gelatinous Cube. When doing any sort of airbrushing, you want to test your paints first, to make sure that everything works as intended. So I'm trying my best to only hit the transparent bits, but I know there will be some overspray. I tried my best to let that overspray be sort of at the bottom of Cthulhu. That would make it look like the water was shining and hitting Cthulhu from underneath. So first I went in with the mix. Once I had a solid coat, I started laying in the blue more and more at the bottom. Okay, back to the painting table. While the ink was drying, I took the time to remove all of the unnecessary plastic from the tea light. And this is what the miniature looks like for now. So let's start on the actual painting. I decided to go with a green tone overall and chose combat fatigue, army green and cultist robe from Army Painter. I also added some black and white from Vallejo and finally some Averland Sunset from Citadel to my wet palette. Starting with the cultist robe, the darkest of the green shades. I covered the entire model with several coats to get a decent coverage. Some of that overspray I actually let shine through because I did think that it gave a nice sort of ghastly light from underneath. I also wet blended in some army green here and there for a basic highlight. Once the paint had dried, I wanted to dry brush the entire model to make all of those gnarly details come to life. The paint used here was combat fatigue. I used several passes with my soft makeup brush to try to avoid any obvious dry brushing lines. Once I was happy with the dry brushing, I moved on to the eyes. I wanted to achieve a glowy eyes kind of look, and I knew that the first step would be to paint the eyes black. While the black in the eyes was drying, I quickly moved into another part of the model. I mixed a bit of a Averland Sunset and combat fatigue. I added some water and glazed the sort of warts on the skin. Now one thing I want you to pay attention to is that I purposefully left the paint thin and a bit runny so that I could get a nice highlight. Notice that where my brush leaves the model, I automatically deposit more paint. This is no magic from me, it's just how brushes work, and one can think about that when painting your highlights. I did some highlighting using combat fatigue to accentuate the shapes that were there, and even sometimes add hints of shapes that weren't there, as with the tentacles. I jumped over to the nails and painted them in black color. Once done, I mixed up a grey color which I started layering into the eyes, covering almost the entire surface but leaving some black around the edges. That dried fast, so I came back onto the eyes and dotted in the core of the eyes with some pure white. And that's what it looks like. You can really see the fade in the eyes. At this point, I gave the wings a similar treatment as the main body, base coat of cultist robe with some highlights. Now back onto the nails. I decided to go in with some grey highlights and even add some brighter streaks to make them look more evil looking. At this point everything had dried and it was time to reassemble the model. I used some superglue and reattached the wings. Looking evil, Mr. Old One. So adding the tea light, I added some hot glue inside the model to fix the actual LED light inside at an angle that seemed to be appropriate. Once that was fixed, I glued in the electronics carefully, making sure that they would be out of the way. The hair blower was used plenty during this to expedite any drying, and especially with the hot glue. Now I used a sponge to get some foam on that water, and once I sort of ran out of space, I used a smaller brush and just stippled in some white on top of those waves. The rim was of course painted black. And finally I used some Vallejo yellow ink to color the eyes. And let's have a look at the final result. And my guess is that you all are thinking, how did those LED lightning effects look like? Well, it didn't turn out quite as impressive as I would have hoped, and if I were to redo this, I would definitely pump up the wattage on that light. Alright, that was that. I hope that you liked the video and the result. If you have any questions, comments or concerns, please feel free to post them in the comment section below. For myself, this was a very interesting challenge. It was a while ago since I spent some proper time speed painting and getting things ready for the tabletop, and I have to say, I really did want to, put some more finishing touches on this one. We'll see. Perhaps I will tinker on with good old Cthulhu here. I want to thank you for watching. If you liked it, then please hit that like button, subscribe, share it. And with that, I want to wish you an awesome day and stay safe out there. Until next time, toodaloo.